I'm having trouble with it. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Okay. I still don't speak with my eyes.
It's nice. It's a big audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was told like 30, 40 people, but
Yeah, me too.
it's
It's
very
very
successful,
good.
which is
It's a
great.
fun topic.
Yeah,
Am I on?
it's true.
It's you're on.
Everybody? Hi. Hi, everybody. We're here to talk today about media literacy in a post-truth world. Obviously, a very topical subject. But first, some opening remarks from Carlo Perrone, the president of EMPA.
Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As president of the European Newspapers Publishers Association, EMPA, it's really a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this debate session titled Media Literacy in the Citizens, How to Find Facts in a Pass-Through Era. I mean, it's a very interesting topic, and I'm very curious to listen to the debate. Today, on World Press Freedom Day, we have a unique occasion to bring together policymakers, media professionals, academics, students, I see a lot of students, and citizens, to discuss a topic of high importance, the reliability of information that we receive and share. Information is at the root of how we form our consciousness and we shape our worldviews. It determines how we act and react as citizens. And I must say, a few years ago, when you used to speak about Press Freedom Day, your thoughts were always going to difficult countries that don't have the fortune to have press freedom. Today, our thoughts go to many countries like Turkey, like some Africans, like what's happening in Venezuela today. But now we have a new problem. We have the problem of fake news, and that's something that came out completely new that we are seeing in these late months, I would say. And unfortunately, finding correct and fact-check news is a continuously challenging task in today's multipolar digital environment. In 2016, last year, BuzzFeed News found that top fake news stories in the American election generated more engagement on Facebook than the top election stories from 19 news outlets combined. Now, during the French elections that we are following in these days, and this evening we have the interesting debate between Macron and Le Pen, one fake news story claimed that 30% of Emmanuel Macron's campaign was financed by Saudi Arabia. It was totally fake. So being well informed allows the citizen to actively participate in the democratic debate. However, as citizens, we all need to start with foundations. We need the necessary tools to guide and help us, especially in the context of digital media, where we see it's so easy to throw out the news, and that's taking over, and it can go spread out in a few seconds. We need the necessary tools to guide and help us in this new situation, especially in the context of digital media. For this reason, the sessions that we are hosting today will make room for a discussion about media literacy. It can provide each consumer with the critical skills to assess what the information to rely and can serve as driving lessons on the online citizen browsing through the internet. In fact, it is more useful than ever in the context of social media. Fabricated news has infiltrated the entire media ecosystem, thanks to the numerous channels through which we can share information, and they go out so fast. Moreover, the spread of information now occurs at such a rapid pace that a fake news item can quickly appear as official. There is therefore a new equilibrium, an horizontal relationship between the citizens, the media, and all the other players, and the political players, that complicate everything. So I think today, more than ever, the press and the free press and newspapers have an important role to play in this problematic. Journalist fact-checked content is one of the best allies of the citizens. We are able to offer valuable guaranteed thought through a notion that should be highlighted strongly. And one key thing in our business, in our work, is editorial responsibility. We are responsibility, newspapers, journalists, publishers, have the responsibility of what they write, of what they show, of what they say. And that's something very, very important that has always more valuable, I think. Serving the role of fourth pillar is associated with a great deal of responsibility. Exercising self-regulation, upholding editorial responsibility is inherent of the activity of our publications. Our journalists check their sources, and we protect them when the information is of a sensitive nature. You see how many dangerous places today there are in the world, that are in Syria, in Venezuela, in Africa, in Turkey, and how important is the key role of journalists, to have good journalists on the ground. And when you have good journalists on the ground, you must train them, you must be sure that they work in a secure environment. You have to, and it's a big investment, but I think it's an investment that serves for the whole community. Our journalists check their sources, and we protect them with information of a sensitive. Editors hold themselves to high ethical standards. We strive to present an accurate and well-balanced explanation of the stories that are published as news. Journalism requires fact-checking, conducting high extensive research, and taking into the relevant sources before reporting the story. Reporting also requires a great deal of financial resources. Reporters on the field have to be protected and provided with appropriate working conditions and fair remuneration. When we put all of these standards together, we can declare that the press really serves as a bright light of a lighthouse in the middle of the fog. EMPA's role, the association that I represent, at the European level, is to make sure that this light can keep shining as bright and clear as possible. Journalist content requires some substantive investment and the security of the financial structure provided by the publisher. For that reason, EMPA strives every day to raise awareness with political makers on the condition of survival and sustainability of the press sector. For this, we need to rely on copyright in order to make our content available and be able to negotiate with all the platforms. We want in the future, for this copyright issue as we are here in Brussels, is vital for the future of the press, because we want to be able in the future to negotiate fair relationship with all the platforms like Google, like Facebook. And in that connection with the press sector and advocating for a neighborhood height for press publishers, which is a recognition of the value of our editorial content, in particular towards internet platforms, and to ensure that citizens have wide access to content. Rules must also ensure a well-balanced advertising ecosystem in the context of the Audiovisual Media Service Directive, in order to maintain consumer protection across all media. Also, the vitality of our digital business model depends on the minimum level of flexibility in terms of of free flow of data in the context of privacy and electronic communication, so that we can offer accessible and user-friendly interfaces to the consumer, to all our consumer. I must say, in the history of publishers, we can see, and that's something that's happened in Europe and in the United States and in Asia, that the brand of the newspapers, the old brand of the old newspapers, are now the most successful internet platforms for media. We are losing, overall, we are losing circulation in our paper edition, but we are growing in a fantastic way in internet. So that means that the trust that all our readers gives us in the quality information is huge, and this trust is passing from paper to digital. And I think that's something that is very important and gives a perspective to our future. In a day of age where both print and digital content coexist, as we say, we advocate the same treatment for digital and print in the context of the VAT rates and press publication. All of these elements come together to form a level playing field that makes it possible for the press to serve its democratic role and to keep the public informed on all issues in the 21st century. We believe the citizen depends on professional journalist content to become responsible members of society. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of Difference Day, especially Professor Caroline Powell, who is at the initiative of this event, to reflect the importance of pluralism in the media and in society. To discuss today gathers and panels of speakers from different backgrounds with respectively unique perspective of the user at hand. In this turn, gives me the occasion to thank also all the excellent speakers who have accepted to express their views to today's discussions, with special thanks to Jasper Jackson, who will moderate the debate, and also for our keynote speaker, Mr. Tibor Navratilus, Commissioner for Education and Culture, Youth and Sport. So I think here we are really all here today to listen what these distinguished people are telling us, but I think the main key is that for our democracy, for our future, to defend press freedom is really essential. Thank you so much, and good work.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carlo. So yes, hi guys. I'm Jasper Jackson. I was, until very recently, the assistant media editor of The Guardian. I will very soon be the digital editor of The New Statesman. In a second, I'm just going to ask all of our panel to introduce themselves and also give us some very brief words on their perspective on the topics we're discussing. Just before that, I'd just like to say there are going to be some time for questions at the end, so please have a think. If anything sparks your imagination and you've got some questions, we'll pass around mics hopefully at the end. If we could start with you, Eva.
Yeah, perfect. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name's Eva Meidel, and I'm a member of the European Parliament. I focus my work on three major topics. First one related to education and skills, because I believe if we lack the prepared human capital in Europe, would be difficult to achieve and be successful in any sort of sector. Second one's concerning more economic development through startups, entrepreneurship, and more access to finance and better regulation for businesses. And the third topic's related to technology and how can technology basically kind of spiral all those areas that need to progress further in any sort of field of society. So I am grateful to be invited today because it's definitely a topic that we follow very closely in our work, and I thought it would be challenging, and in the same time it would be a knowledge opportunity for me to share the panel with people that are actually into the topic every single day. And I hope to be able to also share some interesting perspectives from my side later on. Thanks.
Edwin?
Well, thank you very much, Jasper. Hello, everyone. I'm Edouard Chenot. I'm a journalist from Sputnik France. Thank you very much for inviting us at this event. I assume you pretty much disagree with Polish MP Jana Fotyga, who said a few months ago that we pretty much at Sputnik are like ISIS. So no one would invite a terrorist to such an event, so I'm very grateful. Joke aside, we very much understand that our presence in the media world is very polemical. To give you a few points, Sputnik, of course, is a very young media, but a fast-growing one. It was created almost 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and we now have 32 languages around the world. It reached a global audience of 14 million. In France, our audience tripled in a year, and we roughly reached 300,000 fans on Facebook. Not yet, but almost. According to ComScore, an American firm, we are the 54th news website in France out of 2,000, ahead of medias like Valeurs Actuelles, for those who know, or Marianne. Ahead also of CNN, but of course CNN broadcasts in English, which is a downside in France. Interesting point, we are the 4th website by mean time spent on our pages. Moreover, we are proud to be one of the best streaming video services. I'm far from the subject, but it just gives you a few insights. All our readers, our viewers also are interested to get, even if they disagree with, let's say, an alternative point of view. In a world which was until recently, I would say, dominated by a single worldview, we do believe in pluralism in a multipolar world, should I say. We are doing our best to bring new facts, new elements, new opinions to light, both, for instance, in Syria, Ukraine, and anything we can. Of course, we present the Russian opinion. I assume most people would agree it is reasonable at least to read or to know what Russia, which is a major player nowadays, knows or has to say. No one would, I guess, deny Russia is a major player on the world stage nowadays. In a more personal point of view, it's of course a very tough job because of the current hysteria against Russia, which is a big problem day to day for us journalists at Sputnik. But still, I thus hope we, as a foreign media with national journalists, can bring new facts or opinions that were undercovered or, let's say, untold, as we put it at Sputnik. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
Hi, I'm Bayan Ittal from the Jordan Media Institute. It's a non-profit organization that gives a master's degree, an intensive one-year program in journalism and new media. We also do other programs that serve the profession of journalism and community at large. I'm currently managing a project on media and information literacy in partnership with UNESCO, and it's part of a larger project for UNESCO, Support to Media project, a 3-year project that is funded by the European Union. I'm here to talk about the importance of media and information literacy, especially for the communities where I live, in our part of the world, in the Arab world. It has become more of an urgency for all ages and all groups. What we do is we're currently working with schools as a pilot project with 8 public schools. We set up media and information literacy clubs in these schools for grades 7 to 9. And we're working with 2 universities, also public universities. We developed a course in Arabic and the syllabus for the schools in Arabic, which is the first to be developed in Arabic. All the material that's been developed by UNESCO has been in English and other organizations, of course. And it's homegrown. We use live examples, we use local examples, so people can relate to what we're saying, and it has more impact on the target group. It's been quite an impressive 1 year. I think we've reached we didn't reach a larger number, but I think our aim is to reach as many as we can. We are getting support from the Ministry of Education, which is quite commendable, and we hope we can introduce and integrate media and information literacy into schools and universities in order to make it as sustainable as we can, and then go on to talk to youth, spread awareness across the country. It's crucial that this becomes a national project for Jordan. We are being called by other countries because of the nature of the work we've been doing, by Arab countries who are also interested in introducing this, and and we hope we can make this happen not just in Jordan but for the region.
Hi, my name is Aline Robert. I'm a journalist for Euractiv in France. Euractiv, it's a network of 12 countries working on European issues, so I'm responsible for the French websites in French. And I've been a journalist for 17 years now. I've been working on French and European economics and politics for a while, and investigating different mafia issues too. So I know quite broadly how the European journalism landscape look like, because I've worked with quite a lot of other journalists in Denmark or Germany or UK. And now I work in this network with a lot of people around the EU. We focus on European issues, and what is important for the EU is also France. So we've been working a lot on the French election lately, of course, because the fate of the French election might have an influence on the EU. And I want to testify on this because I think media literacy is also knowing how media work, and how journalism works. It's that it's a fight. It's always a fight. And for this election, it has been a quite tough fight. I think we do have to remind this at Le Canard Enchaîné, which is a satirical French newspaper. There are just 20 journalists. And 2 years ago, they had one of their colleagues that was killed during the Charlie Hebdo attack. And now, during the campaign, they were the one that wrote about the story about François Fillon, who might have given fake jobs to his family. And because of this, they were under threat once again and under attack. They have got a lot, and they still get a lot of insults later for this. And just to point out that everybody, and we have to try to explain to people that journalism is a fight, but it's not a target, and it should stop being a target, because democracy is at risk if you think that the people of Le Canard Enchaîné are the problem. They are not the problem. They are just doing their job and fighting to get facts right. And it's always a fight, and it's always going to be. So I think it's important that we testify on this. It's not something that is easy, and if it's easy, it has to be dubious.
And David.
Okay, good afternoon. My name's David Buckingham. I'm a professor at Loughborough University in the UK. So I'm a media academic, researcher, but also particularly a media educator. So I've been involved in media education, particularly with children and young people for, well, decades. And I've also been recently blogging about these issues, and particularly about fake news. And I would say in some ways we have a problem that is perhaps smaller than people seem to be concerned about, but on another level, much bigger. I think we need to beware of overstatement and panic about fake news, but I think we also need to be aware that fake news is a symptom of much bigger changes that are going on in the media, in politics, and those are changes that are really quite hard for us to address. For me as an educator, media literacy is obviously important. It's one way of addressing the problem, and certainly in the UK, but in many places around the world, people have a lot of experience of teaching about news and about factual media more generally. But I would say, let's not assume that this is going to be easy or straightforward. It's actually quite difficult, and it's more complicated than simply spotting things that we think are fake and differentiating them from truth. So I think it's an issue for educators, but also I think we need proper responsibility, we need proper regulation of media, and in particular we need proper regulation of the technology companies, of Facebook and Google. I would say those companies are actually media companies more than technology companies.
Thanks, everybody. I'd say, Lena, I really like the idea of media literacy involving telling people how tough journalism is, because I spend a large amount of my time telling my friends how tough my job is. We've had a couple of vague definitions of media literacy, but I'm really keen to get the view from Jordan, because when we spoke before, you talked a bit about how the media system is quite different to Western democracies, and how media literacy is, if anything, far more important in that situation. I mean, what's your definition of media literacy?
Well, it's basically helping people search for the information, being able to access it, analyze it, and then use it wisely and ethically. And for Jordan and the rest of the Arab region, as you all know, we don't have enough press freedoms. In some countries, there's just no freedom at all. And in many countries, journalists are being killed on a daily basis, or arrested for speaking their mind or doing their job. So in Jordan, it's not that bad. We have dropped 3 places in the index of the Reporters Without Borders on press freedoms. What we're basically doing is trying to help people appreciate good media, because once they know how a story is formed or how a video is taken and the work behind that, as well as the ideological effort that goes into that, because everyone that presents a story has something to say. And so that person has an ideological background and is trying to influence the other. So if they know where that is coming from, how it is done, then they know what good media is, what independent professional media is, and that's what they'll be doing, or hopefully will be doing. And once they do that, they will demand good media. So we're hoping that the people will pressure governments into releasing, some of the restrictions and basically giving a platform for good media. Social media has helped a lot of young people in Jordan develop their own understanding of media, actually, and they're becoming more active online. The local media is not responsive to their needs, especially the young, and we have a very young population. 70% of our of the population is under the age of 30. So these kids are basically going online and developing their own media. They're doing their own stories, and we have several platforms that are doing excellent work, like Hibar, Kharabish, Aramram, and they're developing videos. They're doing investigative reporting, so we're hoping that with this, it's also about. This is a perfect time for Jordan, because the government is aware of the need for good education. Education has dropped drastically for many years, and they're trying to reform education. So part of the reform system is media and information literacy. It's one of the 21st century skills in education. So this is a good time for us to be there and to convince the government to introduce media and information literacy. We want our kids to have critical minds. They're being recruited online by terrorists and extremist organizations. And a lot of the young people in the Arab world are becoming more conservative. They're racist. So through media literacy and other and the media itself, we can help them identify hate speech. We can help them respect the other. We can help them be aware of gender equality and minorities. And we've seen examples in Jordan where there are signs of racism and hate speech, and so we need to protect this generation, help them protect themselves against this influx of hate that is online, and help them become positive users of this huge tool. It's a fantastic tool, but it's a double-edged tool, and what we're doing is helping them develop the text and the videos and be able to express themselves, so they can be, if you wish, the counter message. They can be they create the counter narrative to everything else, and be active in their own communities.
I mean, you just touched on the double-edged sword that is social media and the internet. I mean, David, with an academic view on this, we've been talking about media literacy for decades. Has the internet made people more media literate or less media literate?
Yeah, I'll go with the academic answer, which is, well, both. I mean, I think it's made media literacy and the task of media educators more complex. I think there is a widespread belief that we get this information online, it all comes to us for free, somehow, out of the air, and it's information. In a sense, I think there's almost a problem with the term information, which implies that it's neutral and it's there to be trusted. I think there's a bit of a danger with new media as well, that we rather over-romanticize what young people in particular are capable of doing. You'll have come across the idea of the digital natives who somehow spontaneously, because they can use the technology, they know everything there is to know. Well, I think what we're finding is there's actually a lot that young people, and actually all of us, don't understand about how these media work and how they communicate. So I think it's important, but it does, to me, imply an educational process. One of the dangers that we've had in the UK is we had a moment really 10 years or so ago, everybody was talking about media literacy. It seemed to be the latest kind of feel-good term in the world of policy. It wasn't really very clearly defined. One of the arguments that I would be making is that actually media literacy requires education. It requires a more or less formal educational process. And just to make the link back, I mean, I think one argument I would want to make is that if you have media literate citizens, then media literate citizens are going to demand quality media. So there's a way in which these things depend upon each other.
I'm picking up the education point. Obviously, it's an area of interest for you. You've got a pan-European kind of view of this to some extent. Do you see a lot of variation between different countries in terms of it being a priority? We've had the UK, it was in vogue for a while. Do you see this as a priority in different places? Do you see other countries more concerned, less concerned about it as a topic?
I think to a certain extent, yes. And it's a good thing that some countries prioritize it. But I think, and I would agree here, that it actually lies into the basis of education. And then you can look into how many countries are performing well in their educational systems in Europe. And all of a sudden you see a few of those countries that each year have very good results on their PISA tests, and many others are always falling, in the very bottom, and they stay there for years. And they don't do anything to change that. And I see that the overall problem of educational systems are very much related to the way politicians think. To reform an educational system, it just doesn't happen overnight, doesn't happen over a year or two. It takes a very long time to implement a reform. And unfortunately, and it's the way those political systems are built, and I'm quite critical to perhaps a system that people perceive I am part of, people that are part of a political system, they want to have short-term wins so that they can perhaps succeed in the next elections. and by reforming an educational system that takes a long time, that's not how they can get their short-term win. So very often, education is put on the back of the agenda of most EU countries, and not only, because it serves some political gains. And it is a very sad truth and reality. And I think we need to all, as societies, fight for this not to be the case. Because we're all speaking today how we want to progress in various areas. But if you don't have the critical mindset, the people that are, ready to assess what's good or what's bad, or which is true information that they read and which is not, it would be very difficult to build those critical societies to progress further. So I'm a strong advocate of more quality education in all sorts of sectors, including this one, when it comes to media literacy. And in the same time, I'm optimistic by nature, but I'm very concerned of the way our societies are developing and the way we, as political systems, shape our priorities and put our priorities forward.
So, I mean, media literacy is obviously sort of the vaccine that we're talking about here, but we're not talking about the virus that everyone is panicking about, which is fake news. We don't have it in the title, but it's definitely what we're talking about. We've got two people here, both from France, and it's a big concern in the French election. I just want to ask both of you in turn, starting with you, Edward, do you think fake news is a big problem generally, and do you think it's a big problem specifically for the French election that's been going on and is going on?
Well, regarding the French elections first, of course, your president mentioned 30% of funds from Saudi Arabia. That was an interesting fake news story. I wouldn't overestimate the impact of fake news during the election process, because if you look at the top 5 fake news during the election process, 24 hours before they were released on the social networks and everywhere, they were denied, and it was very effective. So I wouldn't overestimate the impact of these fake news. For instance, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the radical left candidate, had a very expensive watch, and there was a picture of him with his watch, and of course it was fake news. We shouldn't overestimate it, because most fake news, 99% of these fake news, are obviously fake news. That's in some ways, that's the point. And generally speaking, of course, that's an issue. I wouldn't deny that. But there is, aside from education, I'm not an expert as Professor Buckingham, but the opinion can, in some ways, correct itself on and fairly easily and very quickly, in my opinion.
Alina, do you have any different of opinion there? Do you think it's a problem when you're seeing how people are reporting the election, what people say and believe?
It's different if it's what kind of fake news you're speaking about, if it's misinformation, like totally fake one, or just disinformation, like a picture you take and it's gonna be out of the context, or some information you try to take it and analyze this with your own background to make people think what you want them to believe. So I was part of a project called Cross-Check in France that has involved around 30 news media outlets. And we tried to understand what was fake news and where the fake news. And we did it around on 250 pieces of something, like picture, video, articles, and published around 60 articles to try to explain what's going on, if the news were fake or dubious or totally right, because some of them are right. So we're still a bit in the middle of it, so the election is not yet over. It's quite hard to understand what has been going on. We definitely have seen a lot of fake, or rather misinformation coming from extreme right and extreme left, both of them. And we've seen a lot of direct attacks against Emmanuel Macron. That's obviously from both sides, but mostly from extreme right, and saying that he was gay and that he wanted to make homeowner pay the rent and stuff like that. So we had seen a lot of fake news, but what is the impact really on the election? I think it's quite early to say. But I think Russia Today and Sputnik definitely played a good part in giving fake news in the presidential campaign. And sorry. And for example, I just would take.
So pure fake news. You said like misguided information or pure fake news?
I would say a pure fake news, for
no,
example.
Not a single one.
Okay.
Just tell me one single fake news.
Okay.
One, only one.
Okay, so you published this.
No one.
This
Not
news.
a single one. That's
Can I answer?
that's defamation. That's
Let's hear
defamation.
let's
I'm
hear the
very sorry,
example
but
and we
that's
can
defamation.
debate it at that
Okay,
point.
you ask a question, I'm going to answer. You wrote a story about the fact that 1 million Europeans were organizing a militia against migrants. I mean, there's no 1 million Europeans organizing a militia against migrants. And there was a picture, and we tried to understand where the picture came from. And it's true, there was a few people in Hungary, and we found, because we have tools to understand where the picture come from some kind of youth organization in Hungary. And maybe there are, I don't know, 50, 60. There is no 1 million person in Europe fighting against migrants. And that's a kind of news that, can get everywhere on the social networks, and it's damaging for all what the EU tries to do on the refugee issue. So yeah, it can be a part of fake news in the presidential campaign, I guess.
If you had a question, I mean, unless you particularly want to respond to that particular
About
article.
this particular article, no, I haven't read it, but I will very gladly read it.
We won't go too further down that rabbit hole, but if you had a question.
Just a study that was recently conducted by Stanford University in the US, which showed that most of the US students actually do not differentiate the difference between fake news or real news or some sort of another type of information that they read online, and I found it quite striking. It's a study that I'm citing, and so in this respect, because we also have plenty of students, I was wondering how many of you, if you don't mind raising your hand, how many of you actually think you read fake news? Okay. And how many of you are sure they never, ever basically read any fake news? Okay, and a last question. You don't need to raise your hands, but how many of you use like soft drugs, marijuana and so on? Oh, the reason why I'm asking is because with my team, when we were... Yeah, I said you don't need to raise your hands on that one. But the reason why we were asking is because with my team, we were kind of brainstorming on a different way of thinking of presenting fake news. And we actually found some similarities between, not admitting or don't knowing that you're reading, fake news and soft drugs. And we thought that they're both entertaining. They provide you with quick satisfaction. In the same time, they provide you with some sort of moderate addiction. And this addiction is linked to something gossipy, something that is more of a threat, of a conspiracy. And as coming from, working in the European Parliament, we see how citizens can link sometimes to this news and find them much more entertaining than when we would report on a boring conference where we came with concrete solutions or a report that would actually make their lives better. But the way it's presented on a press release or in the news articles, they're just not interested in reading it. And also, we think that in the long run, both can lead to dissatisfaction with reality. And the difference, though, it's quite striking because fake news are free. And in the same time, truth-telling journalism and verifiable news are very costly. And if I would compare it with some sort of a competition law or when it comes to competition, fake news and traditional media outlets, they're competing on the same product market. but they don't obey the same rules, and you don't have like a competition sort of rules that can be implemented in this case. So it's extremely worrying when a major part of society believes to fake news, even though we say, well, maybe not that many. But from personal experience, because me and my colleagues were part of a fake news spread a couple of months ago. We voted on a resolution that didn't even contain the word Christianity, but around 1,000 online groups in social media at the same time spread the information that we were against Christianity in Europe. This spread over another couple of hundred, thousand profiles and so on. We were not able to respond to this. It was then copied into traditional media outlets that apparently don't have a very high standard of how to check information. And up until today, people really believe and think that this is what we did. And the resolution we voted didn't even contain that word.
We're talking sort of about the modern era, and I'm pretty sure David's going to have some opinions about regulation at some point, but we'll come back to that. I just have a question. We've had bogus stories in traditional media for years. There's a famous one in the UK, which was a front page, which was Freddie Starr ate my hamster. Freddie Starr was a slightly crazy pop star, but he didn't eat anyone's hamster. We've had completely made up stories in traditional media. But it does feel like it feels like people feel that there is something different about it on the web now, that there is something different about the way we consume and media and the way it's spread. What is the internet doing to falsehoods and lies? Is there something specific? I mean, Annie, you're nodding.
I think it has to do with a sense of self-entitlement and protection. People feel protected behind the screen. It's different. They feel if you're sitting, and then it's easy to say, to spread something or and they feel empowered. They can do that and then wait for all the likes and the shares and everything, and it's giving them that false feeling of empowerment. But if I may just go back to false news and misinformation and disinformation, I think we need to really define this before we use it, because false news is insulting. I was a broadcast journalist, and it's insulting to a journalist, because journalists are supposed to have integrity and credibility, and we don't spread false news per se. So maybe it's not information, because information is supposed to inform. So I don't know. We need to come up with a term, David. Maybe by the end of the session.
David, you had a good one earlier when we were talking.
I think first of all, I would say there is a bit of a danger of us contributing to fake news about fake news here. Yes, and I think there is a real need to define what we're talking about, because if you're Donald Trump, anything you don't agree with is fake news. Just to counter your study, I mean, these may all be fake studies as well. No, I know. But I just saw one which told me that young people in the US, on average, believe that 50% of the news they see on Facebook is fake. Yes? And I think actually this raises really interesting question about trust, and about how much trust is healthy. Because 50%, them believing that 50% of the news is fake, strikes me as, if I can use the word, unhealthy, a kind of unhealthy level of cynicism. On the other hand, your Stanford study implies if people really can't tell the difference, then they're a bit credulous and gullible. So we want people to be critical up to a point, but not cynical. Yeah. We want them to trust, but not too far. So I think we really need to think quite hard about what, and certainly in relation to media literacy, we want critical citizens, but what actually do we mean by that?
Yes, exactly. Because, information, or disinformation, misinformation, it's basically what's happening in our part of the world is, it's not just, a story it's more ideological disinformation or misinformation. They're basically taking religious text and deforming it to serve their own purpose. And when people feel they can't argue with religious texts, then they become indoctrinated, and it becomes easy to recruit and easy to influence. And so it's not just any story. There's a lot of, basically poison out there. It's in terms of messages, and maybe we could call them messages. That's more neutral.
I mean, I think media educators
Yes.
like ourselves, there's a long history of people teaching about media bias, media representation, looking at
propaganda is also part of all this.
Propaganda, looking at how media are constructed, looking at how information is selected and framed, and so on. There's a very, very long history of that. And I think in a way, and it's a really complicated issue, and it's really difficult to teach about, particularly to young people who might not be so interested in the first place, who might not be so well informed about the issues. But in a way, for me to just reduce that to a question of, is it fake or is it true, is really oversimplifying.
I mean, this gets to the heart of the thing that really worries me as a journalist and as a media journalist, is that almost by talking about fake news, but also by the fact that fake news has definitely become an issue that people are seeing and people are aware of, it undermines trust in us. Whether or not you follow a set of principles, a set of rules, a set of ethics, you don't have a way of convincing someone that you actually should be trusted. And I think the media's still very bad at telling people why they should be trusted. Do you think there are any solutions to this? I mean, Olivia, you're a journalist. How can you make people trust you?
I think that journalists are not the one that should fight against fake news. I mean, they are not the only one. We are not the only responsible of this phenomenon. I mean, the social networks have really enhanced this mess. And now, they're saying journalists, well, take the broom and clean it everywhere. But we can't do that. It's a too big a task. I think everybody has to be conscious of what's happening, and it has to come from the citizen, but politicians can play their part also. And there was a good example during this campaign, because there was this rumor saying that Emmanuel Macron was gay, and it was starting to spread, and you could see the trend on Google growing. And at some point, when it was just starting to grow quite quickly, he just said, "Oh, it's totally fake. I'm not gay." And he said it during a meeting, and then it just killed the fake news. I mean, we're not the only one to have to restore our credibility, I guess. There's a lot of people. So I think,
politicians included.
So I think the whole society has to be involved in restoring the credibility of some of the news, not just the journalists.
Yeah, I mean, fake news is very similar to populism in politics. If we don't, engage with it and actually rebuttal it, then it's just truth, So we need to be very active. However, it's very difficult in the same time. I gave an example with the fake news that was affecting me and my colleagues. But if you take, Brexit, for example, there were pure things said in media that were just lies. But if you try, but they again sound just so much more appealing to people, and they're so clear when you have a number that says we contribute X amount of money to the EU each day. That's not true. But go and explain it and try to say where actually those money go and how much of them actually go back to the UK. It's way too complicated for the majority of people to want to even listen to you. So for us, it's extremely important engaging also in a personal way with citizens, going, speaking. People, if you would come to a town hall meeting, means you're interested and want to hear. So it is our place there not to speak more about, just explain Europe in our case and speak about it. Because it's kind of like people are disconnected from those topics. They just want to live better. And when you tell them something that they think affects the way they live, and when it contains a certain number, it's just more appealing to them.
I have a question for Edward, specifically about this, because the social networks becoming involved, it's obviously something that many people in the media and politicians increasingly in the UK are calling for. For Sputnik News, is Sputnik worried about Facebook starting to crack down on what it conceives of as fake news and change its algorithms? Because obviously there are some people say that Sputnik News does produce fake news. Is that something that you guys are worried about?
Well, obviously, yes, that could be an issue for us. We're a bit worried that major outlets can work with these, we call them GAFA, I assume. For instance, Decodex from Le Monde. That's a bit worrying because Le Monde would be, I don't know if you've heard about it, maybe it also exists in other countries in the EU, but Le Monde gives a red, orange or green light according to different media. Sputnik was orange. Well, our logo is orange also, but in some ways it's disturbing because Le Monde is both judge and jury. That's what disturbs me, really.
I mean, just very quickly, I mean, the panel as a whole, do you want Facebook to itself start deciding what is a fake news story, or Google itself to start deciding what is a fake news story, or should they not be able to do that? Should it only be in the hands of someone else?
Well, as far as I know, right now it's not Facebook deciding, right? They have an external firm that actually decides for them in France specifically, but
and globally.
Well, not in every country, by the way, which is still, I mean, it's quite disadvantageous if you leave outside those few countries where they've already started doing that. I think because a lot of people think that fake news, clearly technology helps fake news to kind of spread more. It might be some of those algorithms in maybe the long run or the short run that would be able to find a way. It's possible. It's possible, just like technology, has been progressing so quickly. So it could be possible that technology finds a way. Yeah,
I mean,
but I'm a tech.
interesting.
It's a different perspective, and it's rare to hear it. But it is possible that there's way that it's not just because if you think that all algorithms are actually kind of like produced by a person, that's actually not true. Sometimes algorithms do things that it takes a lot of time for the people behind them to understand how those algorithms think. And this is not about placing an ad onto your web page or your social media account. We're speaking about like more complicated algorithms. So it might be the case that at some point an algorithm could be found by itself, for example.
I'm interested in David's perspective because you're a big fan of regulation.
I was letting my eyebrows do the work there because I have to say I think that what certainly Facebook and Google have done so far is tokenistic, it's superficial. I think an algorithm might enable you to spot particular stories, but actually the difference between fake and true is really complicated. It's not a straightforward either or thing. There's a real continuum. There are many things that are partly true and partly false and so on. And I think we need something more sophisticated than technology. And I also don't think that the companies themselves should be doing this, really. I mean, one reason, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier on about appeal, I mean, one reason why fake news exists is because it's clickbait. Because people click on it, they get exposed to the advertising, this makes money for Facebook and Google, and these are among the top 10 highest valued companies in the world. Now, I would like to start by saying, actually, I think those companies should pay their damn taxes, yes? And perhaps, sorry to be populist, but I then think, perhaps the money that comes from their taxes might well go to media educational projects, might well go into funding projects like, for instance, what the Jimmy Wales, the Wikipedia guy, is trying to do. So accredited sources of news. So there are many ways in which that income could be spent to address the problem. But I'm not sure I trust Mark Zuckerberg, for example, to really deal with the problem. Sorry.
Guys, I'd like to try and open it up to questions from the audience, so please do put up your hands. Just for the panelists, I am right at the end just going to ask you one quick question, and I'd like you to give me a very quick answer, and that's what's the one thing you would like to see happen to deal with the problem. We can't quite agree what the problem is, but if you can see one practical step that could be done by tech companies, the media, politicians, I'd just like you to be giving me a quick answer on that at the end. Guys, has anyone in the audience got any questions? We've got mics over here. I'm going to have to do the running quite clearly. I'm assuming these work.
Now?
Yep.
Is now good? Okay. Jane Wyatt from the European Centre for Press and Media Freedom. I would like to respectfully suggest, as a former journalism lecturer myself, that the best way to impart media literacy, media and information literacy, is actually not to teach media studies, deconstruct fake news, and so on and so forth, but to teach journalism, so that young people and older people as well, because as we heard earlier, actually it's the mums and the aunties who are most likely to spread fake news willy-nilly over social media networks, much more likely than younger people, according to the young people that we heard from earlier today. So I'd like to recommend an initiative which my colleague Veselin Dimitrov is starting, called Schools United, with a summer school in Sofia in Bulgaria this August, to teach young people classical journalistic skills which they will use to create their own journalism and distribute in their own social media networks. And in that way, the people who are already very technically skilled, usually, at using video, shooting video, creating their own memes and narrative forms all over YouTube, all over social networks, if they can appreciate what goes into properly checked, fact-checked, researched, confirmed journalistic news in their own environment, then I think that would be a great way forward for perhaps the EU to fund, for perhaps universities to open summer schools to younger students as well, and to just really move forward the profession of journalism so that younger people then aspire to become journalists and to make their own journalistic products and share them in their own networks.
That sounds really exciting. Do you have a question?
My question is, why hasn't it happened already?
Well, there you go. There's a question for Eva. Why hasn't that kind of project been funded?
Actually, I know Veselin, and I work with him on a number of projects. He was up until recently engaged into something else. So people like him decided, he in this case, decided to stop what he was doing with Forbes magazine and do that project. So that's why only now.
Does anyone else have any questions for anyone in the panel? We have a man in a red shirt over there. I don't suppose... I'm going to have to do more running, aren't I? Give me a second.
To be somebody else.
Yeah.
I have already microphone. Can I start?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Thank you. I have a question to Mr. from Sputnik, because when you was presenting your media, you told that this media is representing, point of view of Russia. And before we were listening to very nice Monsieur Plenel from Mediapart, for example. I'm listening to other colleagues. No one told that we are representing point of view of any country. And for example, Monsieur Plenel, he's not representing, he's hitting a lot power of France. And you are a news agency or you are point of view agency?
I completely understand your question. I definitely agree. Sputnik is different from Mediapart or other that kind of national media for national for French citizens or others. But Sputnik is a public-owned media, as well as Radio France Internationale or France 24. And if you read to Mr. Raffarin at that time, he was the French Prime Minister who launched France 24. He said exactly the same thing as Russian officials when they launched Sputnik. Exactly the same thing. I don't have the quote on me, but you can check it. It's to give the French opinion about whatever. That's exactly the same thing.
That's an answer. And yes, the gentleman in the red shirt at the back.
Yes. Yeah, I was wondering about other barriers to media literacy. I don't know how many of the people on the panel follow, for instance, any of the directives from the Commission. For instance, the copyright directive, like the upload filters which are proposed, and also the neighbouring rights, which I know EMPA supports, but so sorry EMPA, which failed in Germany and Spain and have also been dismissed by a lot of copyright experts. I was wondering if anyone on the panel thinks that those kind of things could affect people's ability to do media literacy when you consider that media literacy is sharing media, remixing media, making media, contributing on a social thing. If there's a link tax or ancillary copyright, doesn't that prevent people from being involved in media?
It's an interesting question. I mean, David, do you have an
Yeah, well,
opinion immediately?
yes, you're absolutely right, and yes, it does. I'm not quite sure where the discussions have reached on that. I mean, my sense more generally in the context of the Commission is that media literacy has got rather lost in terms of where it's been located. It's interesting to see that just in the last kind of week or two, media literacy, a commitment to media literacy was written back into the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which is one of the key documents. That's down to you, is it? Well, thank you, because that's important. But yes, you're right, there may well be a contradiction, because if on the one hand you're saying, yes, this is important, yes, people should be doing it, but on the other hand you're tying their hands behind their back and saying, well, actually you can't have free and fair use of copyright material in an educational setting, then you're really making it very difficult for people. So I think that is an important issue.
Bernard, do you think regulations are a danger? I mean, obviously not necessarily just in the EU, but are regulations and restrictions on what people, and I guess particularly young people and also teacher organisations can use, are they a danger to media literacy?
We were asked this question by teachers themselves, because we did some training for the teachers who set up the media clubs and were training the students. And because they were from different backgrounds, and they were saying eventually, but we provided them with all the details, the presentations, the examples. We wanted to make sure it was very neutral. But this can be used as, and can be directed in any way you want. I mean, it can be exploited by, let's say, liberals or conservatives, and the examples you use can shape the minds of these young people. And so that is a serious question that we need to consider. So perhaps it should be done by an independent party. It should not be regulated. It's like textbooks. I mean, the examples should be also updated. It's an interactive material. So the examples have to be updated. The teachers have to, and I don't think we should restrict it to one teacher, or it has to be multiple teachers, because of the mentalities, the backgrounds and everything, because this could be exploited in a totally different way. But in Jordan, I feel safe for one reason, because we're basically entering this as a Jordan Media Institute, which is an independent non-profit, and UNESCO, which has a very good reputation as an independent organization that is extremely professional in what they do. So it's helping us in that area.
There are two actual issues we've now touched on.
Yeah.
There's this particular kind of issue with copyright and those areas stopping people being able to learn and become more media literate, and there's also the potential dangers of regulation in these kind of areas. As a legislator,
I have so my opinion. I mean, a year ago I actually started a conference called Regulation for Innovation, where we touch upon two things. One is, do we necessarily have to regulate everything that's new? If it is, for example, disrupting our societies. And then what happens to legislation, but by the time that it's adopted is actually outdated? or legislation such as copyright. I would not go too much in detail on the copyright. I'll be happy to speak also outside afterwards with you, because that's a whole different subject, which has been not updated for so many years that it definitely needs to be brought to a renewal. So I stand for, if we would legislate, we should not overburden and make it more complicated, and I think we need to look for balanced approaches in, for example, the copyright legislation. It's very difficult and very challenging for us, but it's extremely important, if we legislate, and if it's necessary to do that, to do it in a very swift manner. It sometimes takes us years to come up with legislation, and it doesn't help anyone. And by the time you implement it, it's way too outdated. So the idea of the conferences that we are doing yearly is basically to make sure, and we bring legislators and commissioners to those conferences as well as outside stakeholders, is kind of understand where are we missing and do we miss legislation. And it's quite interesting, because very often different disrupting services such as Uber, they actually say we prefer to have a very clear-cut legislation, to know what are the rules in 28 or 27 member states, instead of having to deal with the different legislation in each member state and obeying different rules. And many people would perceive those sort of services as they don't want legislation, actually. So it's very tricky and challenging, because sometimes we legislate on things which I think we shouldn't be addressing in legislating, and very often we leave others that perhaps need some sort of more clarity, and we legislate way too late on this sort of files.
So guys, we're running out of time, but as I said, I was going to come back to you all just to ask for a very quick answer on this one. I know it's not a simple one, but give me one practical step that can be done by someone involved in this ecosystem that would actually make a difference. And let's start again with you, David.
Okay. I would say at a policy level, I think we need to recognize media literacy as a basic skill. I think we need to see it as an absolutely core, essential element of education in the modern world. People look to the UK for what's happening. I think in many ways, I'm sorry to say, I think we're going backwards in respect of that. So I think it needs to be down there as an entitlement for all children.
Yeah, I'm afraid I quite agree with my neighbor. I would have said education. It's both political and civical education that is needed if you want people to understand what is media literacy and sort out what kind of news they want and what kind of news is true for them. You need to have the schools or high schools helping us. It's at this stage that we can change.
We're probably going for education.
Sorry.
Classic slogan.
Yeah.
But I mean, if there was one particular educational maneuver that could be done, or approach that could be taken, is there something you can think of that could be done right now, tomorrow, if someone had the will and the money?
Maybe set up newspapers in every or a radio station in every school. That's the best way to get them started, and then they can produce media and then learn how it's done and become journalists, as the lady said there, become good journalists, and then push for better journalism, better media in their own countries.
I particularly like that idea. I would have loved a radio station at school.
Yeah.
So education, again, I think everyone is talking about education. I'll have a different point of view. Obviously, there is a kind of class struggle between old mainstream media and young alternative media. I think this happened because old mainstream media had flaws, and one of them is the lack of pluralism, political pluralism within media. I think all journalists come from the same school, pretty much think the same way, and pretty much write the same thing. I wish there was more political pluralism, at least in the French media.
It might sound a little bit, it might sound easy, but I think it's extremely complex. Would agree with education, clearly. I started with that, would like to finish with that, but if we can find ways, because I don't think we provide that many ways, but in the same time also maybe better ways of explaining the value of verified information. I think citizens undermine this fact and the difficulties that journalism how do you actually get to this verified information? I think that's important. Why is it valuable for you to get verified information?
So mostly agreement on that. I'm afraid we're actually running out of time. We do have a brief closing keynote from Tibor Navracic, but just on the way out, could you all please give a round of applause to our panel? Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi. We do have a closing keynote. It appears that Tibor is not quite here yet. Please do hang around. I'm going to try and find him. Hello. Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. Tibor is here now, so we have our closing keynote. So please do sit around. It's the fun.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello. We now have a speech, a keynote speech by Commissioner Tibor Navracic. He's Commissioner for Culture, Youth, Sport and Education.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much. Allow me to thank the European Newspapers Publishers Association, and in particular its president, Mr. Carlo Perrone, for the invitation and for identifying education as part of the solution to the problem of fake news and alternative facts. I would like to start by quoting one of the most renowned journalists of the last century, Indro Monatelli. He said, "Whichever one of you will want to become a journalist, let him remember to choose his own master, the reader." If I had the opportunity to complement these words, I would add an informed reader, because this is precisely the reason why I'm speaking here today. We are experiencing very challenging and volatile times in which the way information is produced, read, and understood is changing as we speak right in front of us. I firmly believe that in this new era, informed and critical readers are indispensable to safeguard the pluralism and quality of the news environment that our democracies depend on. I'm not saying that education is the only solution, but who can say there is a solution without education? Today, according to Eurostat, more than 80% of young people aged between 16 and 29 use the internet and social networking sites on a daily basis. This is good news. There is now almost universal access to the internet and social media, providing young people with more opportunities to inform themselves, to make choices based on this information, to get engaged in campaigning and other civic engagement. But this also creates new social and democratic challenges. Young people are using social media and websites as a news source. But often, those behind these media lack the knowledge and training to do a job that entails a large level of responsibility. Even worse, they sometimes act without the necessary deontology and with little regard for the reliability of their sources, or even with a determination to misinform. Finally, through algorithms and the echo chamber effects flowing from them, the internet and social media keep users away from information that conflicts with their viewpoints. What is read through social media is often what one agrees with. In the worst-case scenario, this echo chamber effect is the antechamber of manipulation, brainwashing, and radicalization. How many people today are flooded with conspiracy theories and Manichaean thinking? How many see a black and white world when it is in reality full of gray nuances? How many lock themselves in a bubble of simple and comforting, tailor-made realities to the detriment of basic human interaction and debate? Is that our idea of pluralism and diversity of sources? It is not mine, and neither is it yours. I cannot think of a better antidote, a better counterbalance than media literacy, a crucial means of equipping readers with the right intellectual tools to have a critical understanding of all forms of media, enabling them to consume and interact with them confidently. Education systems have a responsibility to alert young people to the dangers of alternative facts, to help them develop informed opinions, grasp realities, distinguish fact from propaganda, and resist indoctrination and hate speech. However, recent Eurostat data confirm that 40% of adults have insufficient digital skills. Moreover, we tend to assume that young people are natural digital natives, when in reality there is a huge difference between being digitally confident and being digitally competent. Finally, even those possessing a real command of digital skills often lack the attitude to put them to full use. Only 2% of the digitally competent can demonstrate critical thinking while searching for information online. We may very well have a generation of sorcerers' apprentices who have the tools but not the right skills to process the wealth of information available on the internet and social media. Education has a key role to play in overcoming this. For the last 2 years, the European Commission has been very active in the field of media literacy. We have substantially reinforced our policy cooperation with member states and also mobilized our funding instruments. We have set up an expert group organizing peer learning activities and exchanges of good practices. We have provided funding for transnational projects through Erasmus+, and we have commissioned studies that inform our policies. These actions are a response to the unprecedented mobilization of EU member states after the attack on Charlie Hebdo in January 2015. 7 weeks later, all EU education ministers and I adopted the Paris Declaration, committing to tackling violent radicalization through education and youth action. This declaration is built on 4 pillars. One of them is enhancing critical thinking and media literacy. Last year, EU education ministers reached joint conclusions on developing media literacy and critical thinking through education and training. These provide excellent pointers for effective policies at European, national, and local levels. What we have learned, what do we know? As I said before, young people are confident but not necessarily competent users of media, especially of new media. Competencies associated with media literacy should be increasingly embedded in the curriculum. We must encourage innovative, creative, and participative ways of developing media literacy and critical thinking across subjects. Social media, in particular, can provide an experience of democratic expression and debate with audiences within and outside the school. Indeed, these competencies should focus on accessing and critically evaluating content, whether on or offline. But they should also empower students to interact on social media in a way that reflects our shared democratic values. We need to support young people in building their own narratives so that they understand the principles of freedom of expression by practicing it. Critical thinking and media literacy are easier to develop if there is a democratic culture in the school itself, where difficult social issues can be discussed in an open manner. This experience of democracy within schools and universities is a real basis for students to behave in a similarly respectful and critical way when they are online. Teachers and educators should be trained how to discuss controversial issues in the classroom. Finally, and this point is particularly relevant to you, partnerships with media professionals and media organizations have an important part to play in developing media literacy skills. Getting media professionals involved in training teachers and students creates opportunities to learn by doing. It is also an effective means of demystifying the media and bringing it closer to pupils. Cooperation between the IT industry, social media, civil society organizations, and schools must be used to develop online civic projects. Do you know, for example, that the European Commission is running eTwinning, the largest teachers' network in the world, and a platform that enables direct cooperation between pupils in Europe and beyond? Did you know that one of the awarded projects was focused on digital citizenship? It brought students from 5 EU member states and Turkey together who published an e-magazine and took responsibility for the content, accuracy, and copyright attributions. This is an excellent example that could be replicated at a larger scale. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Commissioner responsible for education, I have extensively addressed one side of the problem and the imperious need to form critical readers. As the Commissioner responsible for culture, let me also address the other side of the coin. This is to say, giving journalists and publishers the means to produce quality information. Quality information comes at a price. A free press is part of the checks and balances of any democracy. This requires robust training, committed work on the ground, and a bulletproof sense of accuracy and responsibility. It is far more than collecting facts and circulating them on the internet. It is not a mechanical task. On the contrary, it entails a human factor and requires thorough investigation and an honest reflection behind every piece of news. The main role of journalists is to help citizens form their own opinion, and that is why they bear a special responsibility. This does not come for free, and no one can expect media to perform this task without a business model that generates proper revenues and by the same token allows for journalists to do their work to the highest ethical standards. One does not come without the other. Speed is often irreconcilable with quality. Informing is not just about a round for clicks, and it is certainly not a task that is meant to be outsourced to algorithms just because information is now increasingly consumed online rather than on paper. Ladies and gentlemen, technology brings disruptive change that is often difficult to capture, especially for those in the front line, and information is no exception. We are faced with many opportunities, few certainties, some good intuitions, some lessons learned, and big questions. We are caught between the urgency of adapting to a new world and the fear of going too quickly, too far. We must strike the right balance between enthusiasm and prudence. And we must be lucid enough to stick to the basic principles that enable the free press to become one of the pillars of our democracies: critical thinking and intellectual independence for both journalists and readers. Thank you very much.